Before last season, the Philadelphia 76ers hadn't reached the playoffs since 2012 and hadn't won 50 games since they reached the finals all the way back in 2001. Their only 50-plus win season in the last 28 years. But after all their years of struggle through the process, they finally started to see results, finishing third in the East and reaching the conference semifinals before falling to the Boston Celtics. Sixers head coach Brett Brown, who would be in charge of player personnel decisions by June after the Bryan Colangelo burner account scandal, stated after they were bounced from the playoffs that the team needed another star alongside their young core, sparking rumors that they would be in the running for guys like LeBron James and Paul George in free agency. As it turned out, they didn't get any of those guys, but they did still try and bring in players to complement their young stars and keep that positive momentum going, while maintaining flexibility moving forward. Let's go ahead and get started with the 2018-19 season preview for the Philadelphia 76ers. The first offseason move to take a look at is Philly acquiring wing Wilson Chandler in a salary dump move for basically nothing. Although he didn't have outstanding per-game averages for a guy that played more than 30 minutes a game last year, that shouldn't be much of a concern for the Sixers. They already have stars to score the ball and make plays for others. They just need complementary guys to do the little things, play solid defense, and make shots off the ball, all of which are things Chandler can provide. He's a league average three-point shooter with good size on the wing that could even move up to the 4 spot in smaller lineups, providing Philly with some much needed lineup flexibility. That was their biggest issue in their playoff series against Boston last year. The only real 3-and-D wing they had on the roster was Robert Covington, who was wildly inconsistent from 3 in the playoffs, which meant that they didn't have the wing depth to match up with the Celtics. Ben Simmons can be a great defender, but hasn't shown the consistent effort necessary to do so, which isn't uncommon for a young player. But beyond that, they were working with a rotation of Justin Anderson, JJ Redick, and Marco Bellinelli. Not exactly the most versatile group of wings. In bringing in Chandler for basically nothing from the Nuggets but cap space for this season as his deal expires next summer, Philly did a great job of trying to fill one of the most glaring holes on the roster. He is over 30 years old and isn't a knockdown three-point shooter, but is at least a step in the right direction to try and improve the roster after missing out on bigger fish this summer. Next up is the team bringing back JJ Redick on a 1-year, $12.5 million contract. He had a career year a season ago and was exactly what that Sixers team needed, as a shooter and veteran presence, so it's great to see the team bring him back once again on a similar 1-year deal that brought him to Philly in the first place. He isn't going to be a great defensive presence, as he never really has been, and just turned 34 years old this summer. But as always, it's Redick's shooting that provides the most value to the team. Philly was a top 10 team in three-point percentage and a top 12 team in attempts per game last year, but they'd like to improve upon that this season, which would have been much more difficult if Redick had found another team to play for. There really isn't much else to say here. We all know what he brings to the table and that the Sixers need what he provides, so bringing him back on a fair deal is a win for both sides. Next up is a pair of big men moves, getting forward Mike Muscala from the Hawks as part of the Carmelo Anthony deal and bringing back Amir Johnson on a veteran minimum deal. Muscala is an interesting addition because he's coming off of a career year with a bad Hawks team, although he did only play in 53 games, and should be able to provide a stretch big presence that's lacking on the roster unless you count Joel Embiid, which, judging by his percentage, you probably shouldn't. That role was formerly played by Ersan Ilyasova, who's now a member of the Milwaukee Bucks, and although Muscala likely won't be as effective of an all-around player as he was, he should be able to at least knock down some shots from the outside and provide space for Embiid and Simmons. As for Johnson, he'll likely be fighting for minutes at the backup 5 spot behind Embiid with Muscala, and that will probably be a losing battle on most nights. He brings great energy and effort to the floor, but not much else. Not only that, but Muscala has the versatility to play the 4 or the 5 effectively, something Johnson hasn't shown to this point in his career. His presence on the roster will still be a valuable one, but it might not have as much to do with his impact on the floor as it did last season. Last up, I do want to touch on the moves the Sixers made in the draft, namely Zaire Smith. Oh wait, this is the Sixers, so Smith already got hurt and will miss a good amount of time with a fracture in his left foot. My mistake. Let's move on. Alright, now it's time to take a look at some issues I see for the Sixers next year. First up is honestly just a lack of real NBA level depth. I mean, Philly has a strong first unit with a combination of either Redick, Covington, or Chandler around Sarge, Embiid, and Simmons, but beyond that is where things get a bit questionable. You have whoever is left of the previous three I mentioned, likely Chandler, and then TJ McConnell, Muscala or Johnson, and Markelle Fultz, who I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. That's a shockingly thin rotation going into the season, and even though there's a good amount of versatility there, I don't know if they have enough NBA level guys to survive the 82 game grind of the regular season. I mean, there are some players on the edges of the roster that could either improve or show to be solid contributors when they need them, but as of right now, I question their rotation as a whole, despite that strong starting unit. Which brings me to my next point, the overall health of the roster, and more specifically, second-year player Markelle Fultz. Now, obviously, injuries have the potential to ruin any NBA team's season, but this Sixers team seems especially susceptible. You have Embiid, who hasn't even played 100 NBA games yet since being drafted in 2014, something that most people seem to have forgotten after such a great year from him last season. I hope nothing but the best for him, and I love watching him play, but big men can be extremely fragile at times, and there's more evidence to suggest that his health last year was an anomaly rather than the norm moving forward. Ben Simmons did at least play 81 games last season, but isn't far removed from a foot injury that cost him what would have been his entire rookie year. And then there is Fultz, the #1 overall pick from last season that just couldn't get right and stay on the floor consistently after an incredibly strained shoulder injury that we still really don't have all of the details on. There have been a ton of people on Twitter and YouTube and elsewhere claiming that he will come back and shock the world this season, which would be great to see, but that's when I'm going to believe it, when I actually see it. What happened to him last year is simply unprecedented as far as I can remember, and although I am rooting for him, I also think it's pretty likely that he continues to struggle with whatever happened to him last year, and he never becomes the player this team needs him to be. If any of their core guys get injured for an extended period of time in the regular season, and especially in the playoffs, they'll be in big trouble barring some kind of unforeseen trade deadline acquisition simply because of their lack of depth. And with the list of injury issues those three have to their name, it unfortunately seems pretty likely that one of them will miss a significant amount of time. Having said all of that, it's time to get to my prediction for the Sixers this coming season, which is probably the most difficult one I've had to come up with to this point in my season preview series. There are just so many variables to this team when it comes to Fultz's return or potential injuries, but in the end, I just don't think that they're a top-tier team in the East this coming season. If Toronto and Boston stay healthy, I see them as on a different level than everyone else in the conference, and even if Fultz has a big return and Simmons and Embiid stay healthy, I don't think this Sixers roster has the ability to match those two teams at their best. They'll very likely end up facing the same issues as they did a year ago in a playoff series against either of them, a lack of 3-and-D depth on the wings. The Chandler move did help them a bit in that area, but unfortunately for them, I don't think it was enough. Having said that, they should still have a great season. If Fultz has a strong return and they can stay healthy, they'll likely win 50+ games for the second consecutive season, something the franchise hasn't accomplished since the 80s. They are the third best team in the East to me, just ahead of Indiana, but once again that places them firmly in the second tier of teams in the conference this season. As a result, I do think they'll win a playoff series, but they won't be able to defeat either Boston or Toronto to make it any further than that. Injuries could always come into play either way, and the Raptors have famously had more than their fair share of struggles in the postseason. But in the end, even though the Sixers do have some great young talent, I don't think the roster is complete enough at this stage to reach the conference finals, just like it wasn't a year ago. That isn't to say that they don't still have a bright future, as they've positioned themselves to be players in free agency next summer, and once Smith returns, he should be a strong contributor, along with the 2021 Heat first-round pick they received via the Suns on draft night, having the potential to give them a huge boost in young talent if the lottery ping-pong balls fall their way. But right now, I don't think they've quite completed the process just yet. And there you have it, my 2018-19 NBA season preview for the Philadelphia 76ers. Coming up Friday is a Jeopardy-style trivia video in which I give some clues and you guys try and guess as it goes along, which is something a bit different, but I'm really excited for it, so be on the lookout for that. My name is Tucker, this has been Sporting Logically. If you missed any of my previous Monday, Wednesday, Friday uploads, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.